thank you all for joining us. We're really excited to be able to share with you today some really exciting research that we've been working on for a number of months with the Ipsos team, who you'll meet here shortly, and our advisory group that many of you are familiar with, a panel of industry marketing experts who commissioned this research in partnership with NMMA and MRAA as part of our Discover Boating work. And what you are going to learn about today and why we are here is really there are three key areas and goals that we had when we commissioned this research with the advisory group. Number one, we want to uncover the macro forces that are affecting today's consumer that are impacting our boating category. Number two, we want to highlight how the boat owner has changed and understand how they're accessing boating, how they learn, how they're influenced, how they make purchases, and who is the owner of today and who is the owner of tomorrow, who will they be? And our third objective was to explore and identify the predictive factors that indicate the likelihood to own a boat. And as you can imagine, as we think about how we want to grow together, we're at an inflection point in our industry where we know we have to work together to grow. And so understanding who we need to go after and who is the most likely person that we are able to capture and turn into a boater is key and fundamental to this research. And also, as part of that, understanding what is Discover Boating's role in that, what is the manufacturer's role in that, the boat clubs, the dealers, and really helping us put all those pieces together so that we're talking with and engaging the consumer in a way that they want to be engaged with and that's effective on behalf of our growth strategy as part of Discover Boating. So with that, I do have some housekeeping items. Well, first, you are going to notice here there's a chat function at the bottom of the screen. Please use that to ask questions throughout the webinar. At the end, we will have about 15 minutes for Q&A. So please add those questions to the chat. I also want to flag that this webinar recording, along with the slides and a number of assets and resources, so the full research report and a lot of helpful materials are going to be made available to you in the coming 24 to 48 hours, and you will receive an email with details on where those materials are and how you can access them. So with that, I get the honor of introducing our presenters today. We have Stephanie Don and Jennifer Bender. Both of them are with Ipsos. Ipsos is a global research firm. And I've had myself and the Discover Boating team have had the pleasure of working with Ipsos over the years. Many of you may know them from their work that they've done with the RBFF. And so we're really excited for them to share with you and do a deeper dive into the boating consumer of today and tomorrow. With that, Stephanie, I'm going to hand it over to you because I think you're kicking us off.
Yes. Thank you, Ellen. Hi, everyone. So just to level set what we're going to talk to you about today, we will kind of go into an executive summary level of insight. So as Ellen mentioned, there is a plethora of additional data and details, but today we're going to focus really on the current landscape, who are the targets we've identified, the current owners, the prospective owners, and what that means for all of you. And then Jen's going to take us through tomorrow's landscape, thinking about what is changing in the world based on the forces we've identified that are happening today, and how is that going to impact the way these people interact with the category and how you can really target them and grow with them. And like Ellen said, we'll have some time at the end for Q&A as well. Okay, so this is a selection of key insights from the handbook. As a note, I wanted to just level set what we did. So we fielded this survey in August of 2025 through early September. We surveyed about 500 current boat owners, and this is made up of people who have purchased before 2020 and after 2020. We wanted to make sure we had a great representation of that because we know a lot has changed. We also interviewed 500 lapsed owners and 500 prospective owners. Everybody was 18 to 75 and balanced to represent age, gender, and region across the United States. When we talk about owners, we're talking about people who own, or if you're lapsed, used to own, and consider your primary vessel to be a motorized powerboat or a sailboat. Majority are motorized powerboats. Prospective owners that we were talking about in this survey are people who self-identified as being 50% or more likely to purchase a motorized or powerboat or sailboat in the future. We do ask them when, so that's going to be something we'll talk about in a little bit, but we kept it pretty open of, do you see this in your future? Um, because when we think about how broad and the penetration of boat ownership in the country, we went to 500, and this is certainly a statistical base. It's a base that we are very comfortable with to make calls on and give you insights around. So wanted to ensure that you're comfortable with all of that. The survey was about 20 minutes, and we do have some additional details on, how we identified some of these prospective groups. But one thing I did want to note is that a lot of this data is already being put into action. One of the ways is with our Alex partner, and they are leveraging these insights. They are applying it to ensure targeted marketing efforts, to ensure that you're reaching the right people on the right channels with the right messaging. So we are using this. We are excited to share it with you and to have you also use it. So through this research, we identified 6 primary groups of consumers that we're going to talk to you about, made up of current and prospective owners. What's really important to note that we're going to highlight throughout this presentation is that current owners and prospects are very different. They have distinct needs, they have distinct motivations, they have different barriers than we've experienced in the past. And so getting these prospective owners and converting them to ownership might look different and will look different than it has in the past because of the way you are going to need to engage with them, and the different macro forces and dynamics that are affecting their life today are so different from the past. And so this research is really going to enable you to understand where you can play and how you can win to grow the industry together with Discover Boating, and then of all of you manufacturers, dealers, etc. This is a slide that many of you may have already seen, but it comes from the partnership with Alex Partners, and it is kind of redefines the purpose and the kind of funnel of how do we grow ownership. Starts with how do we reach and inspire consumers? Who are those consumers who are interested but need help, need more information? This is really where Discover Boating is playing the biggest role. As we go down the funnel, we're getting more tactical in really engaging, converting, and retaining ownership. And so right around the engage level, it's an area where Discover Boating has done all they can. We've educated, we've kind of helped people understand how boating can fit into their life. We're now identifying people who are ready for the next step and are ready for dealers and manufacturers to come in and really say, great, let's make this a reality for you. Let's give you what other tools and information you need and kind of move you down the funnel to really convert you to a sale. So this is the funnel. We'll be mentioning it throughout because the groups we did identify, we've aligned with each level in this funnel. So on the screen are 6 groups. So on the left-hand side, we have current owners. These are established owners, those who purchased prior to 2020, and recent buyers, who we're calling people who purchased after 2020. And there's actually more similarities between your recent buyers and your prospects than there are between your established owners and your recent buyers. So there really is a distinguishing element of this pre and post 2020 where people are thinking differently, they're navigating through their life differently, and it's impacting their engagement and how we can really encourage them towards the recreational boating life. On the right-hand side are prospective owners. And so these are all people who are at least 50% or more interested. But what we did was further group them based on other elements that define them. So they are grouped based on their likelihood. Some are 50%, some are 95%. Their time in which they're ready to buy, next 2 to 3 years, next 6 months, as well as what are the barriers that they're facing and what is their budget. So do they need more education? Do they not have as much available funding right now? What are the barriers? And that's going to really help us help us be able to tailor the messaging, the tactics to help them towards sales. We have a cost conscious group and a time pressed group. Both of these are the targets for Discover Boating. They kind of sit in the reach and inspire section of the funnel, and they really just, we'll go into more detail on them, but they need more information. They're not 100% ready to pull the trigger yet. As we move to the right, we have a group that's inexperienced but has the means. They have the means, they have the desire, they just don't feel confident enough to make that purchase yet. And so this is really your core hand raiser group that will get support from Discover Boating, but then will also be ripe for the manufacturers, the dealers to come in and, help them down the journey. And then we have a group of people who consider themselves ready for a sale, very few barriers to buy, and this is really a ripe target for dealers and manufacturers. Key differences between these groups, and again, when we think about current owners, they are people who currently own at least one boat. They are higher, they have a higher education, they have a higher income, they are older. This is very representative, especially of some of those pre-2020 owners that we kind of traditionally have thought about as the boat owner. But when we think about more recent owners, they're going to be more similar to what I talked to you about with regard to these prospects. Current owners have a more positive outlook on their personal financials. They also value manufacturer websites, online articles, and dealer websites as their main resources for information, for making purchases, for getting all of their content. Those are key things that are very different for your prospects and some of your recent buyers. So these people are much younger. Their income tends to be lower, and they tend to be less educated, not uneducated, but not as high level education as some of our established owners, but they are also younger. So that's kind of goes hand in hand. They have higher engagement with boating through other methods, charters, rentals. They are engaging with the category, but they are less likely to have engaged potentially through their family's ownership or their parents or their grandparents. We do know that engagement is a huge driver of eventual ownership. So knowing that these people are prospects and knowing that they have this desire to be in the category through charters and rentals is a great first step. And for them, their main resources are much more modern. Friends and family, YouTube, social media are huge, huge influencers when it comes to where they get their information and their resources. There's still validity with dealers and websites, but there are also these other elements that are kind of competing for their time. So thinking a little bit more and talking a little bit more about our prospective owners, as I mentioned, they do differ based on some of those elements, when they're going to buy, how much money they have, what their barriers are. And so this is going to kind of focus on summaries of how they're different. Our cost conscious group on the left is a group that are very interested, but financially are not necessarily ready. They are open to alternative access models. So knowing that access is a huge indicator of future purchasing. This group is really ripe for encouraging access however they can get it. They are not as advanced. They're not very expert in boating. So this is also a great time to teach them and educate them and help them feel comfortable. Um, they're not necessarily even only concerned with the purchase of a boat, but they're concerned with the purchase of maintaining a boat. So storage, maintenance, fuel, all of that. So this group, again, longer term investment group, but ones that Discover Boating can really help see how boating can fit into their life on a more regular basis. Our time pressed group, their main barrier is what they perceive as time. They are also very open to alternative access models, I think, especially considering that they need to ensure that they are getting their value out of this. So if they have to make a purchase, are they using it enough to really validate that significant purchase? This group tends to be millennials and Gen X, so midlife. They're more likely to live in the South. They, again, aren't necessarily concerned about the cost itself, or their ability to actually use to, to drive the boat, to learn how to use the boat, to be comfortable on the water. Those are not necessarily their barriers. For them, it's really, how can I ensure I have enough time to use this to the point where I feel the price and the cost and the investment is justified? And so, again, those are two groups that are really optimal for efforts from Discover Boating. The inexperienced group is really right on that cusp. So these are prospects who are much closer to a sales discussion than the other two groups. They tend to be a little bit older, Gen Z and boomers, and they have a higher amount of discretionary income. So cost for them is also not a barrier. What they're concerned with is not having experience, not being comfortable enough to navigate water, to deal with weather, to know how to maintain a boat, and all of the things that are required to optimally participate in the category. And so this is a great time for that element of they've gotten what they can from Discover Boating. They are ready for more support, more tangible support to help move them towards a purchase from the manufacturers and the dealers. And then finally, on the right, this is a group of sales ready consumers who are ready for that discussion. They tend to be millennials more so than other age groups, and they have kids in the home. They have the highest percentage of discretionary income. So, regardless of what they're making, they have a portion of money that can be used on really non critical elements to live, not food, not rent, not transportation. It's really discretion up to their discretion. And so for them, they are very much ripe for that let's make a sale. They're more likely to live in the West and the South, and they do have boating experience. So again, not really looking for education or support, but are ready for that purchase. The next few slides are going to support what I just shared with you. So these are a little bit data heavy, but it really just a snippet of all of the data that we have for you. So to just kind of support what you heard, I'll take you through these at a high level. Your cost conscious group, again, highest up in the funnel. This is a group you'll see on the bottom left, have the lowest discretionary income. So again, supporting that they financially are not ready to invest in a purchase, but they still want to engage in the category. They're more likely to be novices. They are interested in buying a boat and are aware of Discover Boating, but that 26% aware can definitely be increased. I think there's a lot of opportunity to really grow awareness with this group. They are more likely to purchase 1 to 5 years out. So again, a longer term opportunity. And again, their barriers are all related to cost of the boat, cost of the storage, cost of maintenance. So giving them time to become financially ready while encouraging participation however they can will just only solidify how important it is for them as part of their life to eventually own. The time pressed group tends to be millennials and Gen X, more so Gen X. I think this group is one that you can think about as having a lot of things going on. Almost 50% of them have kids in the home. Financially, they have more discretionary income than the previous group. 45% have about a quarter discretionary income, and about a quarter have more. So financially, again, this is not a group that struggles there. Where they struggle is time. Their main barrier is, I just don't feel like I have enough time. And we've done a lot of research with RBFF too around what does time mean? You're never going to give anyone more time in their day, but you can help them understand how or envision how they can boat closer to home, or how they can get more use out of it and use it for family time and use it for some of the things that they're maybe not thinking about, so that they feel like they are going to get their value for it and use it enough. So this is a really interesting group, I think, as well, that we can help envision how boating can play a more prominent role or a more consistent role in their life. The inexperienced prospects they tend to be like younger or older. We have a little bit of a skew of boomers, but we do have a bigger skew of Gen Z. and we have a much more diverse demographic group of prospects, so more likely to be Black or Hispanic. This group tends to live in the Northeast more so than other groups of prospects, but they do have discretionary income. So this group is really, I need help learning. Most are novices or beginners in terms of how comfortable they feel with owning a boat, navigating the water, dealing with the weather, just really feeling like they know what kind of boat is best for them. So they need help that can come from both Discover Boating and experts in manufacturing and sales. Um, so this is a very interesting group as well. And while they are younger, if you can get in with them younger, that's going to also give you longevity. And our final group is that sales ready group. So this group also very much so has kids in the household. So family focus is going to be really critical for them to see how, not necessarily to convince them that boating works for them, but to ensure that you keep in mind family centric messaging when making those sales. They have the highest amount of discretionary income, they have the highest budget for a boat, and they're ready to buy within the next 2 years. They are educated, they have knowledge on it. And so for them, it's their barriers are really few, to be honest. They are concerned about cost. Everybody is concerned about cost. I wouldn't consider cost a real barrier for them today. It's less likely a barrier than any other prospective group. So, as I mentioned, we have a lot more information for you, information on what sources of social media and traditional media are important to them, what how they perceive boating, what benefits it gives them, things that will really help you tailor messaging and think about how to really resonate with these consumers. All of that is going to be available in the handbook. And yeah, we're looking forward to kind of continuing this journey. Jen is going to take us through now some of the trends that are also going to be critical to think about with respect to these segments as you want to target them and build strategies against them. So, Jen, I'll pass it to you.
All right. Thanks so much, Stephanie. And I think that's really kind of a core piece that we want to bring to the forefront as well is that we're not just looking at what's happening today, but we know that you're developing strategies that really need to have legs for tomorrow for the next couple of years. So it's really important, we think, to take that future look and to look at what's happening in the world around your target consumers, around these prospects and these current owners, and really think deeply about what's going to be impacting their behavior. And this gives us what we would call a future view or a futures lens. And we use traditional trends and foresight methodologies to be able to do this. But I think the key takeaway here is really helping you look at what tomorrow's landscape is going to look like as well. And that's through the lens of three different lenses. Lenses meaning macro forces. So things like economic uncertainties. Stephanie, hit the nail on the head. Everyone is really certainly dealing with economic uncertainty. But I think the thing that she also pointed out, which is true and will continue to be true for the foreseeable future, is there's definitely a difference. So we're seeing things like increasing cost of living, the impact of long-term inflationary environments, the impact on a fragmented labor market where wage gains aren't necessarily keeping up with inflation. All of that is certainly having a big impact on what the economy looks like in America today and a large scale impact on how people are thinking about their spending from big ticket items to small. So it's certainly something to be mindful of. I wish I had better news in terms of an economic forecast, but I would expect that same kind of uncertainty to continue for the foreseeable future. Now, hopefully things, will settle down eventually and we'll see interest rates come down. But, as the Fed is trying to carefully balance that, I think we'll continue to see this kind of careful spending and economic uncertainty continue with consumers. So I would say that that is the foreseeable future for the next couple of years potentially. And we see that certainly reflected in things like increase in housing prices and people kind of thinking differently about what are they spending on and where are they splurging versus where are they scrimping? How are they kind of being more conscious about what they're spending, where they're spending, and how that aligns to their values and what they find important to them. Now, the caveat to that, to the second point on the economy, is really what I would call optimism and a little bit of YOLO. That there's still definitely pockets of Americans who are looking at spending on experiences, on luxuries, on premium. And some of that is a little bit of, agnostic of their economic situation, that there's this real sense coming out of the pandemic, I think is one of the biggest drivers of this, that, who knows what tomorrow may bring. Life is short. Let's have fun while we're here. So I think that's definitely fueling some of this mentality around this optimism and luxury spending. And so that can actually be a boon for us in terms of really positioning boating and being on the water as this amazing experience. The same thing that's driving people to spend $500 or $700 on concert tickets can be the same kind of experiential, throw caution to the wind kind of sense here of investing in being on the water. So interesting to think about that kind of duality of where consumers are within that economic picture. And this all really kind of ties into the third point on the economy around a changing definition of ownership. And this is something that we've seen certainly come up in boating, but really across the board. If you think back to, 5, 10 years ago, mobility was going through the same thing as we saw the rise of rideshare apps like Uber and Lyft come onto the scene. There is a real questioning, especially amongst younger consumers and younger generations who are thinking about, where do I want to invest? Where do I want to spend my money? Do I need to own something, or am I just trying to access the experience of owning that? So, I think important to put boat clubs and ownership models and what's happening in our industry really in the context of this is broadly a big question about what's happening and what's important that consumers are really struggling with. And there are many more implications in the playbook itself, or in the handbook, I should say, where we go into detail about the implications for each of the individual groups. But we'll keep this at a high level for now, kind of looking at the whole landscape of all of our target voters. And the second kind of big macro force that we wanted to acknowledge here is this idea of social reconfiguration. And I think first and foremost, and we've talked with the NMMA team a lot about this, is what does the makeup of the U.S. look like now, and how is that changing? Certainly, you've all heard about growing diversity and the makeup of race and ethnicity is changing, but there's also this big piece about a generational changeover where we're seeing an aging population in the U.S. and most of the Western world overall, but we're also seeing, a lot of changes in terms of what does the diversity of the market look like from all of these perspectives. So really looking carefully at how demographics are changing. And then the second point here on social reconfiguration is really about what does that mean for value shift? And what we're seeing is that a lot of people are delaying the big milestones. They're not necessarily getting married or starting households, buying houses as young as previous generations. They're also not having kids at the same time, and in some cases, not having kids at all. So there's a big shift in terms of not necessarily following the same path toward success or the same timing of milestones that your parents or previous generations would have. And that means a structural shift in terms of where people are in financial stability and security, that, if they're further along in their careers, they may be at a better point where they don't have as many expenses because they don't have the house and they don't have the kids. So think about that as an opportunity as well in terms of understanding those changing milestones and this kind of shift in people's path through life and where that creates opportunities for us. And then the third point is, very much tied to that around mindful living and spending. And there's a lot of conversation about, emotional well-being, how that relates to how you spend. Certainly, we see this a lot in the wellness space, but I think there's also a connection here that we can make to restorative experiences. Again, being on the water, connecting with your family. So thinking about, how you spend your money, but also how you spend your time. People are much more conscious of that and really being thoughtful about how they're investing their time and their energy. And then the third big force that we think we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge is certainly the impact of technology. And I think, honestly, even since we wrote this, a few months ago, the landscape continues to change. We continue to see a lot of disruption from AI. And so this first point about increased digital usage and kind of how that's impacting consumers is really about the pervasive use of technology. And I think that has certainly changed even more so in the sense of AI's influence. So if you think about, the changes that behavior in terms of using ChatGPT to answer questions, not necessarily going to Google, or if you do go to Google to look something up, you may just click into the AI results. That is all changing very rapidly. So I think acknowledging that people's path to purchase in many categories and soon to be large purchases as well is really being informed by that digital journey and increasingly by AI as well. So I think there's some element of that that can be a huge benefit to us in terms of making sure that we get into those AI results. But it's also a benefit in terms of thinking about all the different ways and the different digital channels that we have to influence people. And not just in terms of channels and media, of course, but thinking about openness to new technology in boats themselves. So how do we think about people being more open to new technologies, better experiences, what can help make the experience safer, easier, feel more accessible, certainly is something to think about too as technology pervades our lives. And then the last point that I think, is really important, and we've seen a lot of amazing progress in the industry already, is around social media and influence. So I think can't be understated in terms of the role that people are looking to individuals, could be influencers, could just be people they follow on YouTube. It's very much something that we're seeing come to the forefront in terms of influence in many categories, and definitely something that we're starting to see happening in this industry as well. So something that we need to be mindful of in terms of all the different kind of broad forces that are impacting consumers, not just in boating, but ultimately will have an impact on how they come to your dealership, what they ask you about in terms of questions. So that really kind of ties into the next slide where we have much, much more to be able to share with you in the handbooks. And so there will be deep dives to be able to look at the impact and the recommendations for what to do with all of this information. Really build upon the profiles that Stephanie was talking about to look at that future impact of, okay, so if this is the economic circumstance, what does that mean for me as a dealer? Or what does that mean for me as a manufacturer? There's also certainly impacts in terms of what Discover Boating will be doing with all this information, but really a complete picture of the targets. What are some of the kind of key things to be mindful of in terms of the impact of those macro forces? What does that mean in terms of ways to connect? How do you action on this? How do you really engage people? What are the kind of nuances of things to make sure to be mindful of and to include in your communication? So lots of rich information that you'll find in the handbooks as soon as those are available. The thing that we wanted to leave you all with is really kind of a snapshot and hopefully a taste of what's to come in terms of the implications. And, this is barely scratching the surface, kind of tip of the iceberg in terms of the implications, but wanted to kind of give you a sense of some of the insights that we came to the conclusion of as we were working with the NMMA team. And I think, we'll break this down a little bit further in the next couple of slides into implications for manufacturers and dealers. But at a high level, one of the things that really came to the forefront and was one of our hypotheses at the beginning is exposure to water really important? And the truth is, it absolutely is. But it doesn't necessarily always have to happen in childhood. So I think that was really interesting to see that experiences with either being on the water later in life and being exposed, through friends and family, or being in boating adjacent activities. Those do correlate with boat ownership and interest in boating. So absolutely that water gene is critical, but trying to be a little bit more flexible about how we help people develop that water gene. The second kind of big insight was about, as prospective owners are navigating these financial concerns and the economy that we talked about, really kind of deeply understanding people helps us really think creatively and I think more openly about different kinds of access models and how that impact of the purchase journey is changing and how that's really being shaped by new decision-making touch points. So it's a little bit of a combination of looking at, hey, if you're not necessarily ready to pull the trigger on owning, what are all the different ways that we can influence you? Is there an overlap there with different kinds of digital touch points throughout the entire journey? So a lot more, I think, nuance within that journey and a lot more opportunities for us as an industry to be at those touch points in key moments with them. As Stephanie mentioned at the top, the third kind of big insight is that there is a difference between current owners who skew more kind of older. As a Gen Xer, I hesitate to say old, but we're up there, wealthier, more educated, but they also have a more optimistic view of their personal finances. And I guess that kind of makes sense on the face of it, right? That they're further along in life. The kids are out of college. They don't necessarily, they may have already paid off their mortgage. So they are a little bit more optimistic in terms of, not necessarily need to rely on future earnings. But I think there's still, everyone is still reliant on, the information that you can provide, whether that's on the manufacturer site, on the dealer side. Absolutely, they're looking at online reviews and they're thinking about who do I trust? Where am I looking for information? How do I make the right decision? So I think that trust and spending certainly goes hand in hand. And then the flip side of that, of course, as Stephanie mentioned, is that prospective owners are a little bit younger. Again, logically, because they're young, in part because they're younger, they're more price constrained. They're engaging a little bit more through charters and rentals and relying more on friends and family. But they're also relying on things like YouTube and social media for guidance versus that older generation. So not to say that this is, absolutely a monolith, that all prospective owners are the same and all current owners are the same. But in these kind of patterns, we see insights that can help you with your targeting and help you think about your channel strategy, depending on who you're going after. So we have a couple of summary slides here, and again, there's a lot more in the handbooks to go over, but wanted to leave you with kind of this taste of some of the things that you can do with this and some of the very practical advice that you'll find in the handbooks and in the materials that'll be available. For manufacturers, certainly looking at who are those potential audiences that you should be thinking about and pointing you to those profiles and all of that rich insight there, but also thinking about, how does all of this inform the way that we connect to these target voters? First off, communicating that boating really is something that can be enjoyed with a moderate budget. That's something that really came through strongly in terms of, concern about, is it something I can afford? What's the total cost of ownership? So being able to serve as that mentor and help them understand, what does it look like to own, answering a lot of their questions, really leaning into that total cost of ownership element and thinking about how can you provide resource on being that partner through their entire journey. And then thinking too about what are the other resources that you can provide about things like sustainability or how boating helps you with mental health and with energy, getting out in nature. So all of that, I think expands how we're looking at the role that manufacturers can play. And certainly, of course, this is a big part of how our manufacturers are communicating now, but continuing to focus on, enjoyable family, kid-friendly experiences and encouraging people to really think about it from that perspective. But also leaning into some of the new boat tech features and thinking about, how are we communicating things like safety and connectivity, and then thinking too about what are the kind of different digital assets, things like video tutorials, again, to showcase new tech features or to think about ways that you're showcasing other elements of kid and family friendly experiences. All of those can be potentially more digitized into things like videos, interactive calculators, even immersive digital experiences of walkthroughs. I know a lot of you are doing that already, but I think really thinking about what are all the ways that we can kind of help people visualize themselves in the vessel? How do we strategically partner with different channels, partner with influencers, and think about the role that digital plays, especially on social media? And how do you really sweat those assets? So as you're developing more digital content, you're thinking about how to reach people. How do you then parlay that across multiple channels, not just your Instagram or your website, but is there an opportunity to partner with an influencer or to create more content? I'm not saying everyone has to go on TikTok, but that is certainly something for us to think about. So when we look at dealers, the story here is somewhat similar in terms of we're thinking about similar target customers. So you'll see some overlap here about demand for more transparency. Certainly, people again asking questions about what does maintenance look like. What should I expect in terms of service? A lot of that uncertainty comes from that total cost of ownership. And so providing any more transparency, guidance through that process and thinking through that to help them feel really comfortable is certainly going to be important. But also thinking about how do you bring existing owners into the fold? Can you partner with different organizations or your local owners to help them answer questions as well and kind of help people feel a little bit more confident, and help get them excited about being on the water. And I think one of the ways that came through from some of our interviews was thinking about on water events, current owner events that help prospective boaters really have that firsthand taste of being on the water, what it's like, the ability to ask questions that they might be embarrassed to ask about in other situations, and really thinking too about how do we help people build that confidence. So if they don't have the water gene, they haven't necessarily grown up on a boat, how do we help them with potentially offering more boating and safety courses? So thinking more like how do we help people bring that comfort level to the forefront, and also thinking about what that kind of digital to in-person handoff is. How do we kind of help people through the funnel and make sure that they feel really comfortable and that things are really tightly connected between their digital journey and their in-person journey in the dealership, looking at different boat models, and really thinking too about how do we make all of our channels, I know it says, website here, but how do we make all of our channels really digital friendly, really mobile friendly, knowing that more and more people are really just shopping on their devices and, looking at things as they're standing in line at the grocery store. So really thinking about not just fit for channel, but fit for device as well. So we have hit you with a lot of information. I think this is, hopefully whets your appetite and gets you excited about what's coming next. In the handbooks that we are going to be sharing with you, we have certainly the full profiles and all the details on today's boating landscape that Stephanie talked about, deep dives into all of the target consumers, and then this kind of future proofing lens of what's really happening in the broader context and how does that really help us understand not just kind of where people's heads are at today and how to help them through that process, but also what's potentially coming next and how to be mindful of what they might be dealing with over the next couple of years, again, to help future proof your marketing and your planning strategies. So a lot more to come. We're super excited to get this into your hands, but I'll pause there. And I think we have time for some questions.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. We did receive a few questions, so I'll just go in order here. With respect to the prospective group, how is a respondent's likelihood to purchase a boat determined? And why not focus on the first-time boat buyers?
I can jump in on that. Let me turn my camera on. So it was defined based on self-claimed. So how likely do you feel like you are to buy the boat? 10 to 20%, and what is your time frame? So we did have people just tell us what their expectation is. We didn't focus on first time boat buyers because they already made their purchase. So we have some first time boat buyers in the research, and I believe we have them layered in a few different areas. We didn't focus on them because there weren't enough, but we wanted to really focus on prospects to enable building of strategies on how to actually convert these people as opposed to looking back and reflecting on their experience only, versus what people might actually want.
Thank you. Did you see a difference in how each segment of consumer approaches new boats versus used boats?
I believe we asked, I may have to follow up on this with the exact data points. We asked people I think their likelihood or their openness to buying a used boat. It's definitely an option, I think, for people who have lower budgets. It is not, we didn't really spend a lot of time talking to them about this, but thinking about everything that Jennifer just took us through, budgets, concerns about maintenance, I think it's certainly something that will be appealing to many prospects.
Stephanie, can you give some examples of what the boating adjacent activities are?
Yes. So we asked people kind of what else they're doing on the water. Things like water sports, spending time at a lake, spending time near water, anything that's really just going to get people around boats and around other people boating. Fishing is one of them. Um, I think going to places where people are bringing their boats and docking their boats. So really anything that can get people near the water and near other boaters.
Perfect.
Sure.
All right. There's one that says, I see references to fish boats or jet boats. What about pontoons for Gen X and boomers?
That we definitely have that data in available to all of you. I don't have the number offhand, but we did give everybody a pretty wide list. And I believe we included images just to ensure they were clear of what the boat types were. So it should be available for you to kind of dig into for sure.
That'll be in the handbook. Okay, we'll follow up there. Does the material have an example of the survey participants took? We're interested in how customers were presented with the type of boat they were interested in and or the explanations of the types of boats they might choose.
The survey is available. I think you guys can reach on the website or to Kevin if you can't access it, and we can certainly share some of those language with you.
Okay, there's another one. In each of the prospective owners' snapshot, an experience barrier is listed. Can you please explain or define the experience barrier?
So experience is a kind of a net, so an overarching group or theme of the different experiences, and it's barriers related to not really cost. So how are you going to actually operate the boat? What is your experience going to be? Are you worried about buying or learning how to drive the right type of boat? Do you have enough time to really experience it? So it's really just kind of a catch-all for any barrier that's related to the boater's potential experience and challenges related to it.
Um, some of the insights and barriers we may have seen in previous research. From this research, is there a significant new finding that stands out that we've uncovered?
I think what really stood out to me, but would also love, Maggie, your team's advice is I think just how different the experience is between those who purchased years ago and have been sort of in the category and how different the newcomers are, whether you've recently purchased a boat in the last 3 or 4, 5 years, um, and all of the barriers that are impacting how actually complex the decision of whether to buy a boat truly is today versus I think in the past it was I enjoy the water and I can afford it, so I'm going to do it. I think there's much more complexity today.
Yeah, I would add to that too, not just the complexity in terms of the landscape and all of the challenges that people are facing in the broader world, and all of the uncertainty. I think that certainly came through very strongly about all of the questions that people have and kind of how they're navigating uncertainty, um, both in terms of life stages and economically. The other thing that I think, came out very interesting is to look at how people are thinking about ownership models overall. And I think that was one of our ingoing hypotheses, but openness to different kinds of ownership models. And again, that's reflective of changes in the industry, but also reflective of what's happening overall. So I think there are certainly some differences in terms of the landscape has shifted since perhaps we have done this kind of work elsewhere.
Thank you. Okay. Do you think prospective owners will look more like current owners once they are actually ready to buy a boat, older, higher income, etc.?
Um, I think some of those things are going to be required, right? Like you're going to have that financial ability, which may make you older, but I think that all of the other elements that differentiate them are not going to change. what resources they find helpful, how they may view boating to fit in their life, their personal, demographics. I think it's definitely becoming more diverse. People may be looking to integrate it into, not just suburban families, but urban dwellers may also become more prominent. So I think there will be some things that are going to be critical to actually making it a viable element of their, dynamic of their life. But I do think there are a lot of things that are not going to be the same.
Yeah, the other thing that came up, I know when we were talking to some of your stakeholders too, and certainly it seems reflected in the research, is around how lifestyles have changed. If you think back to like again, as a Gen Xer, when we were kids, we didn't have a million activities. We didn't have access to social media. We didn't have the internet. So it was easier to get us on a boat. So I think that wholesale change of how kids' lives are different now certainly impacts the ability to get them on the water and certainly impacts if you're looking at boating for a family activity. I think the good news is, and this is even not included in this study, but something that we're looking at more broadly, is that people are really kind of pushing back on being always on. And I think there's this general sense, cultural sense that maybe we've gone too far in terms of technology and especially social media, and that it really is important to get off of your devices and to spend time with real people. So, is that going to change immediately? No, not necessarily. But I think there's this hunger for this real connection. So, at the same, I'm telling you kind of something bad and good at the same time. Bad in the sense that the overall landscape has changed pretty dramatically about what people's lifestyles are like, but good in the sense that I think there's a real hunger for getting together in person, for having meaningful experiences, for spending time with your family and with friends, for having a good time on water. So I do see a lot of upside and potential growth in terms of that. And that could definitely mean that prospective buyers look very different, that they're not necessarily waiting until they're older. They're not necessarily waiting until they're retired and they have more time, maybe focusing more on having a good time and having recreation now and pushing back on some of the careerism and success metrics of previous generations.
Great point. Okay, was there any data around how much people expected to spend on a boat?
Yeah, we do have the prospective buyers' budgets in their profiles. I believe that they ranged from like 60 to 90,000. I think the highest expectation or highest budget to purchase a boat was around 90. Um, but we know that there are kind of consistent concerns about maintenance and ongoing costs and not just the purchase price. And it's a big question mark for a lot of consumers, and a lot of the prospects not really knowing how much is my storage fee going to be? What are my options? How much is gas going to cost? How often am I going to use it? What if something happens? Do I have insurance? What is all the paperwork going to cost and the lights? So there's a lot of questions around all the additional kind of costs that come with it.
Makes sense. Um, Stephanie, did the research show how impactful influencers are in the actual decision making for purchases? Because there is definitely an awareness that is brought by utilizing influencers, but hearing conflicting insight into whether or not that is actually pushing purchasing decisions.
We didn't, I don't know that we have a specific way right now to track if an influencer has actually resulted in a purchase. But what I can tell you is that prospects are much more likely to value social media as sources of information. YouTube, um, social media in general, lots of influencers, but it does not discount the value and connection that they get with when engaging with manufacturers and dealers. So it's kind of twofold. I think that the influencer, if I had to, give my opinion, it would be that the influencer and the social media, it drives the desire for the lifestyle and the engagement and seeing how it can actually fit into their life. What's a day in the life look like? How do you maintain a boat? What is it like the purchasing process? Like it gives people kind of a glimpse into the lifestyle, but it doesn't discount or replace the value of the conversations that people will have on site with dealers and with manufacturers. Does that? help. Okay.
All right, I think we have one or two more questions. Do you think that the shared ownership model is something we should be focusing on more prominently as an industry?
I mean, I
Daniel.
can start and then ask you to jump in, Steph. I think short answer is yes. It is something that we as an industry need to be thinking about and really I think kind of embracing. And it's because of all of those bigger forces that we were just talking about, economic uncertainty, a little bit of live for today mentality, and part of that is um, potential unwillingness or reticence toward making big long-term investments like financing plans, which again is not just unique to this industry. It's certainly something that we're seeing people kind of question around home ownership and owning cars and any other kind of big ticket item. But Stephanie, I'm curious for your perspective from the study itself and the data that we're seeing.
Yeah, and I did just pull up on my side the main data deck. So to the earlier question about used boats, about 50% of prospects and even prospects that earn a higher income, they're interested in that used boat. Fractional ownership is less common for like the more higher income prospects, but it's still about a third of consumers who are prospective owners in general, considering joining like a fractional ownership program. So I think for all of the reasons that Jen mentioned, and especially more prominently among some of those groups that are not ready to commit fully financially or aren't sure how much time they're going to spend, it's definitely very attractive for those people. I think there's people who are much more ready to buy or maybe have a little bit more discretionary money. They're not going to want to sacrifice and compromise with other owners. Um, but I do think it's something that's going to be growing.
Yeah, and certainly something to think about as a funnel, right? That more getting more people on the water, getting them more exposed, helping them feel more confident and more comfortable, should help in terms of broadening that pool.
Yeah, it does feel like a good, I don't want to say a trial run. I think some people may never leave that option, but it's still better than not having them at all. And I do think it can help people integrate it into their life at their pace.
Okay. Thank you, Stephanie and Jennifer. Those were all the questions we had.
Great questions.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. We will be following up via email with a list of resource and materials you can grab from our Discover Boating Industry Resource Center, and we'll have the recorded webinar, like Ellen mentioned, and this presentation. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, please reach out to the Discover Boating team and we will get back to you. Have a good
Thanks
day.
for
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.